It's back. Vikings is back. Man, I forgot how much I love this show. First of all, or I'll get to that in a second. Now, this season of Vikings, or the season premiere of Vikings, picks up at an undisclosed amount of time after the season 2 finale, which basically detailed Ragnar rising to power after killing King Horik, and basically with the prospect of eventually going back to Wessex and claiming the land that King Ecbert promised as part of their deal. Now, this episode details them actually sailing back across the water to Wessex, whereupon they meet with Ecbert again, except he alters the deal. The Princess of Mercia, or the Queen, I forget what she is, but she basically has asked Ecbert to send more of the Northmen to help her in trying to sort of reclaim her throne. And basically, Ecbert says to Ragnar and the other Vikings, I will give you this land, but you have to help me with this one thing. You have to fight for her in this tiny little skirmish. It's not going to be a big deal. And Ragnar he doesn't want to do this because he really has no interest in fighting. Him and Lagertha basically have no interest in fighting for something. They have no interest in glory. They just want to make a living. They just want to farm. But he says, that wasn't part of our original deal, but sure, I will fight. I can't speak for anyone else at this table, but I will fight. And you can basically sense that he's doing this to avoid a larger conflict with the British, which the British under King Ecbert have proven to be a formidable force even for Ragnar, because King Ecbert is not just your average power-hungry idiot. I mean, he's very smart, and that's one of the things I like about him as a character. Speaking of which, the characters, a large part of this episode was sort of a reintroduction to these characters, although that is no bad thing, especially for a season premiere, and especially with characters this interesting. And the thing I was most impressed by is that these reintroductions were all integrated very organically and very naturally into the story. It didn't really seem like the episode ever stopped for any reason and said, okay, this is what this character is doing, this is what this character is doing. Maybe it kind of did that once or twice, but it never slowed down the pace of the episode. And the pace, as I've said, or I basically said all throughout season 2, the pace has gotten better on this show than it was during season 1, whereupon it was really slow. But yeah, these characters, I'm still liking all of these characters. Sure, some of them got a little shortchanged in this particular episode, but Ragnar is still interesting. Ecbert is still interesting. Lagertha is still interesting. Floki, even Bjorn, who Bjorn is. I really like the kind of slow progression that they're going for with him, how he's becoming more like his dad, but at the same time, Ragnar is still kind of having to instruct him. They're not doing what they could have done, which is, make Bjorn this sort of unbeatable, infallible presence on the show, which when it comes to a famous figure like Bjorn Ironside, I think, it's Bjorn Ironside. When it comes to a famous figure like that, you could easily fall into that trap as a writer, as in that you could just make them this perfect figure. But they don't do that. He's still played by Alexander Ludwig, who is much better here than he was in the Hunger Games movie. And yeah, I'm liking, and I also like the little conflict that they sort of set up. They actually set up some pretty interesting or potentially interesting arcs in this episode that could stretch for the entire season. For instance, Lagertha, this is probably the least interesting arc, in that some of Lagertha's supporters, or not really supporters, but basically some of Lagertha's people, high-ranking people in her territory, are kind of plotting to revolt, because they feel that her ambitions are pretty modest compared to theirs. So that's probably the least interesting, because it does just kind of seem like King Horik and Jarl Borg all over again. But when it comes to Ragnar slowly sacrificing what he finds happiness in doing, which is farming, in favor of battles, in order to avoid a larger conflict. I can't speak. I actually find that kind of interesting, and the fact that they're potentially setting up this corruption that could that could envelop his mind since he's now king, again, could be potentially very interesting. Very interesting on what is already a pretty intriguing character, and the acting is still pretty good all across the board. Because Travis Fimmel is still great as Ragnar, Clive Standen as Rollo, Linus Roche as Eckbert, George Blagden, who before this show I had never heard of at all. I had not heard of a lot of these people actually. I'd heard of Linus Roche because he had that small part in Batman Begins, but yeah, none of these other people. And George Blagden, who I IMDb'd the guy, he's a relative newcomer, so he's very good as Athelstan, and Gustav Skarsgård, completely unrecognizable vocally as Floki. So yeah, really enjoyed this episode. Set up some potentially very interesting arcs for the season. Didn't slow down. Reintroduced the characters very effectively without compromising the storytelling of the episode. And the historical... I've actually gotten some people disagreeing with me about the historical accuracy on the show, but let's just say the production values on the show remain in top form. In fact, they are actually better than they were in Season 2, which I felt Season 2 was a vast improvement over Season 1 in terms of a lot of things, but the production design in particular, I get the feeling that they're getting a larger and larger budget as this show becomes more and more successful. Granted, it's still not on the level of something like Game of Thrones, but still the production design and the authenticity of so many of these beautiful locations and sets and buildings is just so eye-popping, and yeah, really takes you back to the time of Vikings. So yeah, really enjoyed this episode of Vikings, and again, really looking forward to next week. We're getting into the spring shows now, and some of the shows that I've been watching, like Agent Carter and Star Wars Rebels, are about to end, or at least temporarily end before their second season. So yeah, until next time.